Hello, my name is Bill Jones and I'm a Functional Skills tutor with Dove Group. Welcome to this Functional Skills tutorial, which today is looking at one of the essential non-calculator skills needed for the Level 2 Maths exam, namely subtraction. The NSCN Level 2 Functional Skills Maths exam includes a 30-minute non-calculator paper, which is worth 25% of the overall marks. Your ability to subtract one number from another without the use of a calculator will be tested in the exam. This presentation demonstrates 4 different methods of subtraction. The first method is the one most learners seem to have been taught at school. The second is the method I was taught at school myself. The third is a very different method which avoids having to do any subtraction at all. And the fourth method is one you probably haven't seen before and one I only recently discovered myself. Hopefully, your subtraction skills will already be good, but if they're not, one of these methods should work for you. Before we look at the 4 methods of subtraction I've got for you today, it's worth looking at what the word subtract actually means. The word subtract comes from 2 Latin words. The Latin word sub, which means below or from below, as in submarine or subterranean, and the word tract, which comes from the Latin word trahea, which means to pull or to take away from. So subtraction is literally the process of taking away from below. First method of subtraction I'm going to show you is the one most people seem to have learnt at school. It's certainly the one I see most people using when I'm doing my work. The sum we're going to do here is 342 take away 276, and the way we set that out is what we've got in front of us there. And that's because, remember, subtract means to take away from below, so the number that you're taking away, this 276, has been placed below the 342. And you've got to make sure that your numbers are lining up, because remember, you've got columns here in our number system, hundreds, tens and units. You need to make sure these numbers are lining up properly. Now, what you've got to do is to take away 6. You've got to take this 6 from the 2. So here, you've got to do the calculation to take away 6. You can't just turn that round and do 6 take away 2 instead. Okay, you must stick to what you've got. So it's the bottom number subtracted from the top number. So in this case, 2 take away 6. Now, what that means is that you're stuck with a problem here because you can't do 2 take away 6. So instead, you need to try and make this 2 bigger. And the way you do it with this first method is this. Remember, this is 342. If we call that 332, we'll have taken 10 away from this number, which we can then add to that number to make 12. Then we'd be able to do 12 take away 6. Now in practice, the way this method works is you look at what you've got, 2 take away 6 in this case. You go, okay, well I can't do 2 take away 6, so I'm going to borrow 10 and make that number 12, and I'm going to take that 10 away from there, and I'm going to call that number 3. So what we've got here is the same as we had before. We've got 330 plus 12, so we've still got 342 on the top, but now we can do 12 take away 6. 12 take away 6 will give us 6. And then we move on to our next column, and we've got to do 3 take away 7. Well, again, we can't do 3 take away 7, so we're going to take 10 away from here and put it there. So now we've got 13 take away 7, and we can do 13 take away 7, and the answer is 6. Finally, in our last column here, the hundreds column, we've got 2 take away 2, and we can do that, and the answer is 0. So the answer to the calculation 342 minus 276 is 66. This second method of subtraction was the one I was taught at school, and it works slightly differently to the one we just looked at before. We're going to do the same calculation, 342 take away 276, and we know, of course, that the answer to this is 66. We still set out this calculation the same way as we did before, with the number we're taking away written below the one we're taking it away from. And we're still left with this problem, 2 take away 6, which we can't do. this is where the method works slightly different. What we're going to do is just add 10 to this 2 and make it 12. And then what you do is you pay it back by putting a 1 there. Now I'll explain to you what's going on here. When we borrow 10 to make this number 12, what we've got on the top line now is 340 plus this 12. So we've got 352 on that top line now. It's 10 bigger than it was. To repay the 10 that we've borrowed, we make this bottom number 10 bigger than it is now. So this is going to become 286 instead of 276. Now, since we've made both numbers bigger by the same amount, i.e. 10, when we do the subtraction, the answer should be correct. So we're going to go ahead and do this first column here. We've got 12 take away 6, and the answer, of course, to that is 6. In this next column, we've got 4 take away, not 7 now, but 8. And 4 take away 8 is a sum we can't do. So we borrow and we pay back. 14 take away 8 gives us 6. And finally, in the last column here, you've got 3 take away 3, which is 0. So again, the answer is 66, just as it was before. Slightly different method. I think it's a little bit neater because there's no crossing out involved. But again, it's horses for courses. If it's new to you, give it a practice and see how you get on with that one. We'll have a look at the third method now. This third method of subtraction avoids having to do any subtraction by kind of turning the whole problem around. Instead of thinking, what do I get if I take 276 away from 342? What you do here is work out what you need to add to 276 to make it 342. So you set it out slightly differently. You're not doing a subtraction here, you're going to be adding numbers to this bottom number until you get to 342. Now, there's a few ways you could do this, but what I'm going to start with is by adding 24 to the 276. If I do that, I'll end up with 300. Now I need to end up with 342, so what I need to do now is to add another 42. And if I add that to the 300, I should end up with 342, which is what I'm trying to get. Then what I need to do is to look at the two numbers here that I've added together. So I've added the 24 and I've added the 42, and those two numbers added together give us 66, which we know is the answer to this particular calculation. So that's the third method of subtraction. This is actually called, and I'll write it here, complementary addition. Complementary addition. And it's handy, especially if you're doing mental arithmetic. So it's a lot easier to add to a number and keep that running total in our head than it is to subtract from a number and keep the running total in our head. So if you're doing subtraction in your head, so to speak, the best way perhaps to do it is by this method called complementary addition, where you add to the lower number until you get to the number you want, and then you add up all of the bits you added. With a bit of practice, it works quite nicely. This fourth method of subtraction I'd never heard of until a couple of years ago when I discovered it on YouTube of all places. Again, we're going to do the same calculation, 342 take away 276, and then we know that the answer we're going to be getting at the end of this is 66. It's not set out quite the same way. You'll notice there's something different. I haven't put a subtraction symbol here, and that's because what you do is you give each of these digits, the 276, you give them each their own subtraction sign. Now you've got to work through the columns going from the right-hand side to the left, just like you do with all of the others. And we're still stuck with this problem, 2 take away 6. But this time, instead of saying we can't do that, so we'll need to borrow 10, you go, well, actually, I can do this because 2 minus 6 would give us minus 4. And we would write that as like this, minus 4. And then we would move on to our next column, 4 take away 7. Well, again, we can do that, and the answer is minus 3. And then in the last column here, we've got 3 take away 2, which is 1. Now, when you look at the answer I've got there, you might think that that's just nonsense because it should say 66 and it doesn't. But this is where you need to remember that in maths, we have a number system that is based on columns, and these three columns are called hundreds, tens, and units. So what you've actually got here is 100, take away 3 tens, which is take away 30, take away 4 in the units column, which is 4. And if you do 100, take away 30, take away 4, you'll get the answer 66. It's very different to those other methods. It's a really, really interesting and quick method. So my advice, if you haven't got a way of subtraction without a calculator that works for you, this would probably be the one to look at closely, because it is very, very good and very, very quick. You've just got to remember that you've kind of got to decode what you get on the bottom line here. But that just means remembering what these numbers mean in the place value system that we use. Okay, that's it. That's a quick look at 4 very different methods of doing non-calculator subtraction. Any one of those will work for you if you don't already have a method that works for you. But remember, practice makes perfect. Thank you for watching. See you next time.